Very warm welcome from my side as well. My name is Max Senges, and I came back to Berlin after 4.5 years in California last year. And one of the things I guess I brought with me was David and the World Frontiers Forum. So super big thank you to David and everybody who's involved, the young pioneers who are really making this a very special event. I think serendipity and swimming on chaos and being willing to embrace that is part of our setup here, really. I do think that that is an important part of creativity and of pioneering, as we will see the various perspectives from philosophy, from law, from technology, from artists, very importantly, and from the United Nations, really come together in an unexpected way, and I guess that creates this somewhat rippling effect and creative chaos that you will also experience today, I believe. Another example of what we're looking for is really this hoodie is an idea about a Bahamian space agency. So to inspire the locals, to inspire the kids in the Bahamas, he thought, okay, what if we had a space agency? And I think that's exactly the kind of thinking, just to get out and think about where do we want to be in 20 years with digital identity, which might be an Archimedes point to build an online environment, to build an online ecosystem that is truly humanistic, to get to the title of our session now. A humanistic conception of technology is at the heart of it, and I'm also going to weave in a bit more context while we move forward. This is a picture of Admiral Rickover. He is an amazing man. You should read about him if you don't know him yet. He built the nuclear Navy, basically, nuclear technology in the Navy, which obviously is a very, very dangerous undertaking. And he did it in a very smart way, and he did it with this humanistic understanding of what that technology is, and that we can and must shape the technology to the benefits of humanity, rather than thinking about the power aspect of a military operation or a capitalistic aspect or whatever other aspects, political aspects, control aspects, to use technology for access to political participation, access to education, access to the financial system, to financing, and to the law. All of these were points made yesterday by the Undersecretary General Fabrizio Hochschild, who's really Guterres' right hand for internet questions, and he gave a talk that in this case, luckily, he couldn't give live because he was grounded with the flights. So we have the video, and it's up on the WFF website, so you can, I think, get a really nice understanding of how this matters to 1.7 billion people in the world who don't have any identification in the moment. So giving an ID to everyone is actually one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So very big words, big goals. We have 2 days. One day today. I think expectation management has to be that I hope we ask some good questions and get started in thinking in the right way and cross-fertilize some ideas. So with that, I'd love to invite my panelists up here. We have Agnieszka Kurant, who is doing amazing contemporary art. She explained yesterday how she's outsourcing her work both to non-human life forms like termites, as well as click workers on Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So she's very much in the middle of these collective intelligence, collective identities, individual identities. Agnieszka, if you could join us up here. Next up, we have Andy Clark, a philosopher, fellow philosopher by trade, who gave an amazing talk yesterday. Really, it hit me like a bus. It became so obvious when he said it, that we actually have a distributed identity, and as we are participating in online conversations and so on, there's pieces of us that get scattered around in the internet, and all of that together makes us, and we extend outside. I'm sure he can explain that in a much more elaborate fashion than I can. And of course we have Larry Lessig, inventor of the Creative Commons movement, which I still think is the best and only working innovation in copyright, in a way. For 100 years, Larry, you'd be a better judge in how long, but it's working. And he gave a really interesting talk yesterday about governance, public interest, and how advertisement is or is not a good model for framing these conversations. So welcome. If I may kick us off, and I really hope we all have these mics that allow us to just speak, so if we coordinate amongst each other, maybe we can have a conversation between the four of us rather than always going back and forward. I very much would love to see that. Agnieszka, do you want to start to share a little bit what brought you here, maybe your impressions from yesterday, and what you would like to share with the audience about digital identity and your work?
So my point of departure for most of my work is an interest in collective intelligence and how it's being changed with digital technologies, and in particular, I am interested in what happens to the notion of self and also notion of society and bonds in society with automation of human decision making. So when we realize that algorithms are better than our personal feelings and judgments, so we come to a conclusion that something that kind of defined our human exceptionalism, which is like the ability of make independent, smart decisions, that now actually it is better off outsourced to algorithms. And what does it mean for our sense of self as individuals? And what does it mean for the communities and for society? And I've been interested in the questions of what I call plasticity of the social brain. So in a similar way that and neuroscientists talk about plasticity of a brain of a human, how our brains continue to evolve, and how, for example, let's say invention of writing was a major evolutionary step, how we can also think about this automation of human decision making by AI, how it's going to change not only our individual brains, but also the kind of the social brain, the ties, the relationships, the collective intelligence of society.
Wonderful. And that, I think, relates quite a bit to Andy's thinking. Andy, do you want to get us introduced to your view?
Yeah, sure. So, is this okay? Yeah. Okay. So I think we have many interests in common. Everyone on this panel. My sort of starting point is as a philosopher and a cognitive scientist, kind of wondering how we should think about ourselves in this sort of complicated nexus of resource and opportunity and threat that we live in. So in a way, I'm sort of interested in what would be a good shape for the technologies that we wrap around ourselves so that they become aids to being who we want to be rather than impediments to that. So I guess one thing that was occurring to me last night is that there are some dimensions of sort of relationship to our technology, and some of them actually seem to have resonances to me to the whole Berlin Wall thing. So if you think about a good piece of technology or a bad piece of technology, you can maybe start to divide them up along the lines of, is this a technology that is about control or is it about cooperation? You can think about, is it about visibility or invisibility? And you can think about, in the end, is it you or is it not you? I kind of think that these dimensions, and there's no clear sort of good or bad side to this. I think it sort of depends what you're trying to do. But think of the things that seem to live most happily on the you, not you boundary. They're probably things like your gut microbiome. You know, it's stuff it's genetically not you, and yet it's so important to you being the person that you are, the thriving or not thriving organism that you are. So I'm interested in what tech would have to look like if it's going to be to us something like our microbiome is to us, I guess.
Thank you. So really, this distribution, the collective identity that we have here together, and how that interacts in a smaller conversation when we're getting into one mindset, and how it distributes. Super fascinating. And I think with the wall, you also brought up a theme that we heard yesterday and that I think is pretty prevalent to our conversation, Larry, that I do believe I found in your work years ago, but I haven't been able to actually track that particular quote. So is it true that you have that conception of architectures of access and architectures of control? And is that maybe a good entry point to explain how to design digital identity architectures for access rather than control?
Sure. I'm going to pretend to answer your question by saying the following. What's striking to me about this conversation is very personal. I mean, I feel like, I just sitting here on the stage realized almost half my life I've been working on this question. 25 years ago, which is a little bit less than half my life, but let's not say how much less, I started teaching the law of cyberspace at Yale Law School, and at the very first class, these questions were being asked. And what struck me is, at the very beginning of this field, we were talking about how are we going to build digital identity, and what would the person be on the network, and how. And of course, as I look back, we realize that, in fact, digital identity has been built. We didn't build it. It's been built for us. It's not our identity on the internet. It's identities that have been given to us in the different environments we happen to occupy on the internet. It's not an identity that allows us to control how we are presented. It's an identity that marks us and categorizes us and tags us and enables advertisers to advertise to us, to talk to us in ways that advance their own objective. Now, it's not possible to be an American and be against the idea of advertising in general or the market in general. You're kicked out if you assert views like that. So I don't want to get in trouble as I return back to the United States. Of course, I love the market, but we have to realize that the consequence of this platform or these platforms of advertising is very different in the context of the market versus in the context of democracy. And I think one of the greatest challenges we're facing as democracies is the extraordinary poison that these platforms have presented to the opportunity of self-determination through democratic means. If you look at the way these platforms are being used because of the infrastructure of advertising that has been enabled, they are being used to destroy the very idea of democratic deliberation. It's not talking in public about what ideas should control the future of our countries. It's instead being spoken to in secret by these machines of advertising that divide us up and separate and anger some and outrage others and bring others to the fore as they're being manipulated by these technologies of algorithmic control to figure out exactly how to produce the result that the person who's paid the most wants. We have no idea how to deal with this problem from a democratic perspective. In the United States, we are incapable of legislating around this problem because, the First Amendment stops the government from even trying to protect democracy against this kind of influence. And so as we think about the aspiration to build digital identities, we have to recognize we are against an extraordinary market influence that has already figured this out. And it's not to the idealism that we speak to about self-determination and creating the worlds we want to create. They've built it for us. And it's not a pretty world they built.
So super interesting. Now, if you look 10 years out, which is kind of one of the conversations we had yesterday, one of the points that were brought up is, it's not, we can analyze and we can, think about, debate, deliberate, but in the end we need to understand where we want to go. And I think if we have that conversation, then hopefully, today might mark the day where that journey begins. Or to be more precise, it has started more than 25 years ago, and the question of identity is, of course, an ongoing one. So I'm not going to claim that it starts today and we will solve it. But where do you think, what can we do to improve that condition, to test if that there is a path, an inspiration for where we might go? if so, I wanted to follow up with you directly, but if you want a moment, it's actually for the next panel that I had prepared technologies of freedom, right? Liberation technologies is a series in Stanford that I think is really interesting, that is inviting thinkers to exactly do that, project how we can use that technology for freedom. And I think the motto of enlightenment, sapere aude, dare to know, dare to decide, dare to be you, is really what we're talking about, right? How can we enable that informational self-determination?
I mean, one of the challenges we have is I don't think we actually have a conception of how that freedom exists in the world that we know will be the future. Like, we've come from this bizarre period in human history where, in some sense, we've all been in the middle of the same conversation. We all had, in the United States, there were 3 television networks between 1950 and 1985 that 90% of the public was exposed to all the time. In European countries, it's even a smaller source. So this kind of era of broadcast democracy is what we think of when we think of democracy. But of course, those 35 years are completely aberrational in the history of humanity. Like, it never before and never again will we all live in the same place at the same time, where we all have the same understanding of the conversation or what is the issue. And so I think the real challenge for us is, like, when we imagine the future where we all are in some sense living in our own little bubbles, or lots of diverse bubbles, which again on the culture side of life I think is a wonderful thing. I think it's, from the cultural perspective, it's infinitely better time than it was 50 years ago, no doubt. But from the democracy perspective, if we can't even have the same conversation, we don't even understand the same facts, we're not even living in the same epistemological world, what does democracy mean? I mean, my own country is going to be ripped apart by this impeachment of our president because there are 30% of us who can't understand how the other side thinks what it thinks, and there are 30% of us who can't understand what the other side thinks what they think. And we have no way to connect, even to begin to understand the issues. Like, I literally cannot comprehend, people I grew up with, how they support the president. I can't even understand it. But I can't understand it in part because we're not living in the same place anymore, and we never will. So what does this identity in these billion different universes look like? I don't have a sense of the answer to that.
So maybe to recall 2 examples that were brought up yesterday that I think were really instructive in terms of pointing a direction. One was from Fabrizio Hochschild when he spoke about the digital identities used in Estonia. So every time you get stopped on the street and I don't know, for funky driving or whatever it might be, why ever anyone from the government would look into your records, it will be registered and you will be informed. I think that's one of the first components. That's the kind of guiding principles that I'm looking for, that we should embed in the design and in the development of such systems. No, this is the World Frontiers Forum.
Sorry, I guess anybody can do that. It's not just me. But just to say, actually, doesn't Larry that raise the question whether we need a really different organizational structure when it comes to government? Just really different. Just to be frank, that our body does not work at all by the principles that we run the United States of America, right? We're a distributed system, and there's a super complicated reality that my cell in my heart is experiencing relative to the cell in my brain, and there is a communication, but it's very complicated, and there's nobody who could, even today, who could really even explain how that works, but it works. And so isn't it possible that I'm gonna stop and just say that I think that between all 3 of you, there's some, I'd love to hear your thoughts, frankly, Andy, on all of this. Thank you. I'm done.
And Agnieszka, I do want to also bring you in right after, because you asked somewhat a similar question, right? Like, what's happening if autonomous systems and...
Yes, same question. It's also a question about culture. You know, actually, I just want to relate to what Larry said, that these changes are already integrated by many humans. And for example, the citizen credit score in China is an example where, in fact, it has the digital control and this automation and collection of data about citizens has actually analog consequences, because individual citizens are internalizing this kind of censorship, self-control, self-monitoring into them. So even possibly, like, the police might be obsolete very soon, because people will self-control. And I think that this is an example of, and so one of the, you know, this idea of like hacking into our decision-making system, that what could be our answer? I mean, we were discussing yesterday the question of like we need some kind of antivirus for this, you know? I mean, to keep with the metaphor, like what kind of, is there any way that we can ourselves, I mean, we need to fundamentally redefine our value systems, our ways of referring to any kind of information that we're being served. How to do it? I mean,
isn't education that immune system and a better understanding and literacy and participation, so that we can, in fact, make sane decisions about who we are and who we want to be and who we want to interact with? But Andy, you've actually given me a wink some time ago. Please do come in.
Well, yeah, the conversation moved on a bit since then, but I guess I did want to sort of come back to the issues about just how different the situation we face is. So the picture you were painting is one where we're in this absolutely different situation, where, you know, 30% don't understand the other 30% at all. And I wonder, you know, what it was like back to, say, the American Civil War or something like that. You know, it's not that unusual a situation.
Can I just respond? It's really important to add to that, right? You're exactly right. We are exactly back to where we were in the 19th century, the 18th century, everywhere back. Here's the difference. In the 19th century, you couldn't see where the people were. We didn't have polling. We were not legible. And so in some sense, it wasn't as embarrassing that we were completely ignorant and polarized and stupid about a million things. Like, we could just presume that people were wise, and the leaders told us we were wise. Today, we're legible. Right? So the craziness of that difference is now so visible and operating, and now we begin to think, we're stupid, we're ignorant, we're completely not entitled to be running ourselves anymore. The whole premise of democracy depended on the obliviousness that we had about who the people were. So I agree.
What a great opportunity this is then, because we can actually see that we're more ignorant than we want to be, and we could, you know, refurbish our digital infrastructures to actually serve us better. I think that will actually go together a bit with using education as a kind of antivirus. You were asking yesterday, when did humans become hackable? Yes. When did we become hackable animals? I think when we invented language, that's when we became hackable. That's when other people started to just get in with whatever they wanted to say to us. And we had, you know, we have to teach our biosystems better abilities to estimate what to trust amongst their own responses, amongst the resources that swirl around them. So I'm also very interested in the kind of the vision that was coming from Blaise yesterday of personal AIs. You know, these will be on-device AIs that are not sharing everything all the time. They're not sharing everything with the cloud or with Google. It's kind of yours. This could be really like having a sort of helpful partner around, and you would kind of suffer if you lost that helpful partner in the ways that we know we suffer. So I do feel as if there's a kind of opportunity here to improve our situation, and that maybe we'll see shape of how to do that better if we stress the continuities with what we've been before rather than the differences, although I think both are real.
And maybe to elaborate a bit more on that personal AI thought. So, you know, one of the answers technologies give when technology is criticized is, oh, we can solve it with technology. So, to some degree, saying, oh, the system is going to be really complex and AIs are going to manipulate us and so on and so forth. And then we say, well, you know, we have an AI for ourselves, and that's the solution.
That was not a solution.
So I do want to say that I don't think that is the solution, but I do think that you know, leveling the playing field and having an AI that is really personally loyal to you and not to any company or service provider is really, really important. And Blaise had a really nice picture. He said, you know, having a personal AI is like owning your house, while if you use an assistant in the cloud, basically you're renting a room in a hotel. And I think with that picture, you understand what we're talking about. It's like you are driving your car. That doesn't solve mobility problems, but you are in charge of that particular piece. So I do think it's an important piece of the puzzle.
It's an important conceptual piece in the sense that we can understand what would be great. And Blaise has been inspiring the conceptual alternative ever since I've known his work in this field. But you have to, I mean, the frustration I feel here is, look, there's an obvious elephant in the room, which is the business model of the dominant economic digital world is against that individual freedom. They don't want you to own your own AI and to live your life independent of their ability to be feeding you what they need to feed you to feed their own machine of advertising. They want you to be doing that. And so we can aspire to this idea of like rebuilding our government to reclaim our collective self-determination. Bullshit, it's not happening. Like, look around us. We can't even get elected officials who are not embarrassing across democracies across the world. You think we're going to also then get a democracy to rethink our future in a way that pulls us back from the monster economic power that is interested in us not having all these things you're talking about?
I mean, look at what's going on with sustainability now. Some of the stuff we were seeing yesterday, the fact that sustainable resources are now a commercial kind of product, if
That's
you like.
my point.
People want it. So
When you
people
make
want
it-
this stuff, and therefore someone can monetize it in some way, that's fine.
Brilliant.
And now I'm
It'll
going to
still
use
be-
my moderator qualities and also come in because, Larry, last time I checked, Blaise is working for Google and I'm working for Google and we are having this conversation with you in order to understand what to do. We're not saying this is perfect. We're not saying this is how it should be. It's a development. Identity is a development over time. We're not the same people we were yesterday. And Blaise is doing exactly what he said yesterday. He's developing an AI, a personal AI for you. And so that's been my sense since I started working for Google 10 years ago, is we are part of the problem, but we also want to be part of the solution. And this is, I'm still there 10 years later. I do think that we're starting to be a bit tight on time, but we're here the whole day and it's meant to be a conversation, so let's continue that conversation over the course of the day, and hopefully, as mentioned, beyond this day, and there are new constellations and movements being forged. So with that, thank you very much for that first panel.